The world just watched the unthinkable happen live on television. Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, looked straight into the camera and called the British Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, a traitor. Within minutes, Westminster went into total meltdown. Phones were ringing non-stop inside Number 10. Diplomats were fleeing meetings. And what followed in the next 48 hours was nothing short of political annihilation, a complete collapse of Britain's government in real time. What Netanyahu revealed didn't just expose hypocrisy, it exposed betrayal at the very heart of British power, and the fallout, it's now threatening to rewrite the future of British politics forever. It all began quietly, almost too quietly, on a Thursday afternoon. The British government announced it was suspending arms export licences to Israel, citing humanitarian concerns in Gaza. The statement was small, tucked away inside a dull Friday press release, the kind designed to avoid headlines. But someone did notice. In Jerusalem, Benjamin Netanyahu read the announcement and saw it for what it was, a deliberate act of betrayal. And within 2 hours, he made 3 moves that would ignite the biggest diplomatic explosion in Britain since the Suez Crisis. First, Netanyahu cancelled his official visit to London, a direct and public insult to the British government. Second, he expelled 3 senior British diplomats from Tel Aviv. And third, he did something no one saw coming. He called a live press conference, cameras rolling, world leaders watching. Standing before Israeli flags, Netanyahu's voice was calm but cold. While British soldiers once fought beside us against terrorism, their current government stabs us in the back, not through diplomacy, through betrayal. The silence that followed was deafening. Within minutes, the entire world was watching. News outlets from Washington to Berlin ran the same headline: Netanyahu accuses Britain of betrayal. But the real bombshell came next. Netanyahu held up a stack of documents, real papers, not screenshots or rumours, and said they were proof that Keir Starmer's government had been secretly communicating with groups Israel classifies as terrorist organisations. Britain, Netanyahu declared, looking directly into the lens, has betrayed its oldest ally. That single line detonated like a political nuclear weapon. Washington's response was immediate, but not what London expected. The US didn't defend Britain. Instead, the White House expressed deep concern about the UK's reliability as a NATO partner. France and Germany said nothing at all. In global diplomacy, silence means condemnation. Britain stood alone. Inside the Foreign Office, chaos erupted. Civil servants described it as a slow-motion car crash. Seasoned diplomats who had served under 5 different prime ministers said they had never seen anything like it. Emergency meetings ran late into the night. Reports say voices were raised, accusations flying. One senior official described the mood as pure panic, and as the crisis deepened, Britain's veterans, men and women who had fought alongside Israeli soldiers for decades, began to speak out. Videos surfaced online. A retired colonel, tears in his eyes, said, "We bled together, we died together," and now Starmer spits on that sacrifice. His video hit 3 million views within hours. It wasn't just political, it was emotional. For many Britons, Netanyahu's words felt like the painful truth they'd been too afraid to say aloud. Then came the backlash from the Jewish community itself, and it was devastating. The Community Security Trust recorded over 120 anti-Semitic incidents in just over a week, a 340% spike. Synagogues received threats. Jewish children were harassed on their way to school. Rabbi Jonathan Goldstein broke down in tears during a press conference, saying, "We thought the dark days under Corbyn were over. We were wrong." The Jewish Chronicle published a front page with just 2 words: betrayed again. It accused the government of staining Britain's moral conscience for generations. Polls showed 89% of Jewish Britons had lost faith in Labour's leadership. 90% had gone overnight. And then something happened that no one in living memory had seen before. The King of England, Charles III, broke royal protocol. At a private reception with Commonwealth diplomats, he delivered remarks that were supposed to stay off the record, but they leaked. His words were simple but powerful both. Britain's strength has always rested on honouring our commitments to allies who stand with us in darkness. When we abandon those commitments, we abandon ourselves for 70 years. The British monarchy has remained silent on political affairs until now. King Charles had just publicly sided with Netanyahu against his own Prime Minister. Palace aides said the King personally reviewed and edited his speech multiple times. He wanted his meaning to be unmistakable, and it was. At that moment, the crisis stopped being political. It became existential. For the first time in decades, Britain's moral authority was in question, not by its enemies, but by its allies. The pound plummeted 2.3% in a single trading session. £14 billion wiped out in hours. Major investors panicked. Defence contractors like BAE Systems and Rolls-Royce began exploring moves to Ireland and Poland. Even long-time Labour allies like the Unite Union turned on Starmer, accusing him of gambling with workers' livelihoods to score political points. By Friday night, the writing was on the wall. Starmer's government was bleeding credibility, support and allies, and both at home and abroad. But the next 24 hours would turn this crisis from a scandal into something far worse. A potential criminal disaster that could destroy his government completely. By Saturday morning, Britain was no longer dealing with a simple diplomatic crisis. It was a full-blown government meltdown. Inside number 10 Downing Street, panic had become routine. Ministers were fighting behind closed doors, aides were leaking messages to journalists, and the phones never stopped ringing. What began as a policy statement had turned into the most dangerous political scandal of the century. And then came the real explosion. The truth behind those mysterious documents Netanyahu waved on live television. At first, London tried to dismiss them as fabrications, but late Saturday afternoon, anonymous Foreign Office insiders began to whisper that the documents were real, and worse, they exposed something truly catastrophic. According to leaked reports, Starmer's government hadn't just suspended arms exports. They had allegedly interfered with Israeli intelligence operations. Operations that were actively protecting British citizens from terrorism. In other words, Downing Street had been sabotaging the very security network that helps prevent attacks on British soil. If that's true, it's not just bad politics, but it's a potential national security crime. Former Attorney General Geoffrey Cox demanded an immediate parliamentary inquiry. He warned that any minister who had engaged in secret communications with organisations linked to terrorism could face prosecution under the Terrorism Act 2000. Think about that. British government ministers, the people supposed to protect the nation, could now be facing criminal charges for aiding its enemies. As that revelation spread, Britain's political landscape cracked open. The Labour Party, once celebrating Starmer as a stable leader, turned on him overnight. Emergency meetings were called in secret. WhatsApp groups with names like Save Labour and Rescue Britain filled with angry MPs demanding answers. Cabinet meetings turned into shouting matches. Reports emerged that Foreign Secretary David Lammy threw a folder across the room, yelling that he was never consulted before the arms suspension. Defence Secretary John Healey was overheard telling aides that Starmer had destroyed decades of military partnerships overnight. By evening, journalists were camped outside Westminster, waiting for resignations. They didn't have to wait long. Senior backbenchers began openly discussing a leadership challenge. A letter of no confidence started circulating. Within hours, 43 signatures were confirmed, just 39 short of triggering a formal vote to remove Starmer as leader. Meanwhile, the markets continued to crash. The pound dropped further as international investors dumped British assets. The Financial Times reported billions leaving the country's defence and tech sectors. One Israeli tech CEO told reporters, "Why would we invest in a country that betrays its allies?" The message was clear. Britain's global credibility was collapsing. And in the middle of this chaos, one man saw his chance: Nigel Farage. While Starmer stumbled through press conferences, Farage seized the spotlight. His speeches were fiery, emotional and direct. "Netanyahu is right," he told cheering crowds. "Britain once stood shoulder to shoulder with its allies. Now we stab them in the back. Labour has betrayed everything this country stands for. So the response was electric. Reform UK's website crashed 3 times in 2 days under the weight of new membership applications. Donations poured in, over £2.8 million from ordinary British citizens, furious with the government. Polling data confirmed the shift. Labour's approval rating collapsed from 39% to 24% in under a week. Reform UK surged to 26%, overtaking Labour among working class voters. For the first time, Nigel Farage was being discussed as a real contender for Prime Minister. And then came Sunday, the day everything broke beyond repair. Netanyahu returned to the cameras, promising to release even more evidence. British intelligence tried desperately to prevent it. But by evening, the broadcast went live. The Israeli leader stood firm. The British government's betrayal goes deeper than anyone realises. The documents I hold today will reveal the truth. He wasn't bluffing. Minutes later, major networks began airing redacted excerpts, allegedly showing direct communications between British officials and groups previously sanctioned under terrorism laws. The documents were explosive. The public reaction was immediate and furious. Starmer betrayal began trending across social media with millions of posts within hours. As the nation watched in disbelief, Buckingham Palace confirmed that King Charles had called a private meeting with senior advisors, the second in 48 hours. Palace sources said the king was gravely concerned about Britain's moral standing and international reputation. His earlier remarks were no accident. He knew exactly what was coming. By Sunday night, the British government was on its knees. Polls showed 68% of the country believed Starmer had damaged Britain's global reputation. Nearly half of Labour's own voters said they were reconsidering their support. Inside Parliament, whispers of resignation turned into open predictions. Senior ministers began quietly updating their leadership campaigns. Angela Rayner and Rachel Reeves were both making calls. Starmer's allies, once confident, were silent. And across the Atlantic, the final blow landed. The White House released a statement saying President Biden was deeply disappointed in the British government's handling of the crisis. In diplomatic language, that's the equivalent of a public humiliation. America had just turned its back. By midnight, one truth was undeniable. The government of the United Kingdom was collapsing in real time. A single accusation from a foreign leader had triggered the downfall of an entire administration. The betrayal, the leaks, the economic freefall, all of it was now spiralling beyond control. And in the ashes of Labour's implosion, a new question emerged, one that could redefine British politics for generations. Will Keir Starmer step down before he's forced out? Or will he cling to power as his country burns around him? Because this story isn't over, not even closed. Netanyahu says he's preparing to release more classified material, evidence that could lead to criminal charges, resignations, and maybe even arrests. And as the world watches, one thing is clear: Britain's political foundations have been shaken to their core, and the world will never look at its leadership, the